Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Kathleen, and today's video I wanted to go ahead and share with you guys the books that I read so far this year. I've had a great reading year so far ever since my reading slump went away. I've read a total of 26 books between January and April, so this video will be very long. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So starting in January I read a total of 7 books, and 3 of those books were the Lifelike trilogy by J. Kristoff. I read the first book when it came out a few years ago, but I never continued on with the series, so I decided to reread Lifelike to continue reading the other 2 books in the trilogy. I really enjoyed it. I gave the first book 5 stars, I gave the second book 4 stars, and I gave the third book 4.5 stars. It is a sci-fi series with androids and robots, and it's really fun. I would highly recommend it. The next book that I read in January was Dry by Neil Shusterman and his son Jared Shusterman, and this is a dystopian where the California part of the United States runs out of water, and so we have our main character who's trying to survive in a world without water, and obviously as human beings we can only survive like 2 or 3 days without water, so it's a really scary book. I actually really enjoyed this book. It is a standalone. I actually love pretty much all of Neil Shusterman's books, so I did give this book 5 stars. And the next book that I read in January was The Winter's Curse by Marie Radotsky. I apologize about the mispronunciation, but this is a young adult fantasy novel. It follows Kestrel, who is a military daughter, and her people took over this other country and made the people of that country slaves, and she one day buys a slave, not knowing that this slave is leading a rebellion. It's really fun. I actually really enjoyed the book. I gave it 4 stars. The next book that I read in the month of January was The Zodiac Academy Ruthless Fae. This is the second book in the series. I read the first book in December. I read this because it's highly popular on Book Talk, and I was hoping that I would really enjoy it because so many people enjoy it. It is supposed to be like more spicy than a young adult book normally is. However, I ended up hating it. I hated the first book, and because it was so popular, I decided to give the series a second chance by reading the second book. Hated the second book too. I gave the first book 1 star, and on the second book I gave it 2 stars, but it's really 1.5. I had a real problem with the bully. It's supposed to be a bully romance, but I had a real problem with the consent in this book series, in which it doesn't exist. I felt the bullying really stepped over the line. Honestly, became a little bit more like sadism, and the main characters are really they have absolutely no self-awareness and no self-dignity. They just let the bullies bully them, and they didn't do anything about it. If anything, they kind of forgot about it. They thought it was funny, and so I had a real problem with this series. A lot of people keep saying, oh, keep reading. I gave this series 2 books, 2 chances, and it shouldn't take me reading beyond those 2 books for a series to get better, in my opinion. So I understand a lot of people love the series. It is just my opinion. I will not continue on with the series. And the final book that I read in the month of January was the BookTube Chicks Book Club pick, and it is Once Upon a Read Along by Stephanie Garber. I actually quite enjoyed this book. It was a really fun read. By the way, this is the Pretty Fairy Loot edition. I did give this book 4 stars. I thought it was fun. If you want to hear more of my opinions on this book, I'll go ahead and leave the BookTube Chicks live show discussion linked on the screen for you guys. Alright, moving on to February. In February, I read a total of 5 books. The first 2 books that I read was the rest of the Winter's Curse trilogy, which is The Winter's Crime and The Winter's Kiss. I didn't love these as much as I loved the first book. They were just not as engaging as the first book. It was really slow moving for me. I gave the second book 3.5 stars, and I gave the final book 3 stars. The series peaked at book number 1. The next book that I read was Reign of Shadows by Sophie Jordan. This follows a princess whose parents were killed when this perpetual darkness settled into their kingdom, and she is blind. But honestly, the disability rep in this book sucks, because most of the time you can't tell that the main character is blind. The romance was a little bit of an insta love, however I did enjoy the book. I thought it was fun to read, and so I did end up giving this book 4 stars. The next book that I read in February was Beach Read by Emily Henry. I read this because my friend Chloe from the Brunette Bibliophile and Desiree from Libri Labra really wanted me to read this book. They love romance and they especially love Emily Henry. I'm not a huge romance reader. I love my sci-fi and I love my fantasy. You guys know this. I actually enjoyed the story and I really liked the characters. But because this is a romance book, and so therefore it is very romance heavy, I thought the romance was slightly cringy and I really couldn't get past the cringiness. So I did give this book 3.5 stars. Again, nothing wrong with the story itself. It was just a romance, just didn't do it for me. And again, this is a romance book, so very romance heavy, and so it kind of like I just couldn't get rid of the cringiness every time I read one of the romance scenes. Again, my opinion, it was still a really enjoyable book. And the final book that I read in February was the BOOKTUBE Chicks book pick of the month, and it was The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. This was actually a really interesting book. I really enjoyed it. It is about our main character. Something happens and she basically gets thrown into the library of her life, and she can revisit parts of her life and see how her life would have been like if she had chosen to go down a certain path. I really liked the concept of the story. There were some moments where I thought this wasn't really necessary to the overall plot of the story in my opinion, but I still really liked it, and so I did give this book 4 stars. If you'd like to hear more details about my opinion on this book, I'll go ahead and leave the BOOKTUBE Chicks live show discussion linked on the screen. Alright, moving on to March. The first book that I read was Rise of Fire by Sophie Jordan. This is the sequel about that princess who is blind and her parents are murdered and she lives locked away in a tower. Again, disability rap sucks, but I found the story enjoyable, and I did give this book 4 stars. It is a duology, so these books are really short. If you're looking for a quick and easy young adult fantasy to read, I'll highly recommend this series. The next 3 books that I read was another trilogy, and it is the Ruined trilogy by Amy Tintera. It is Ruined, Avenged, and Allied, and I really enjoyed this book. So it is about these people who have these superpowers, and because they have these superpowers, they're considered dangerous and they're considered ruined, and so people don't really have a high opinion of them. I still really enjoyed the series. I gave the first book 5 stars, and I gave the final 2 books in the trilogy 4 stars. Would highly recommend it. Really cool superpowers in here, a really action-packed, highly recommend it. The next book that I read was one of my most highly anticipated reads, and I was actually quite disappointed in this book, and it was The Ones We're Meant to Find by Joan He. Joan He wrote one of my favorite books of all time, which was Descendant of the Crane. Loved that book to death, so super excited when she came out with this book. It sounded really fun. I heard it was a dystopian about sisters who were separated, and for the most part that is what it is. So these sisters are separated. One is living on an island and she has no idea how she got there, and she has to get back to the mainland where her sister is at. I don't know how to explain, but this book was just weird, and to be honest, I'm not quite sure I understood what happened in this book, and that is probably the reason why I gave it 3.5 stars. There might be some deeper meaning to this story that I really didn't get, so if you have read this book, please let me know what you thought about it, because I don't get it. The next book that I read during the month of March was Onyx and Ivory by Mindy Arnett, and this was a book that I picked up randomly because it was available on Prime Reading. I really enjoyed it. So it's set in this fantasy world where these people live behind these giant walls, because outside the walls there are these monsters that come out at night. Our main character, she has like a special ability that she has to hide from everybody, because people with special abilities are considered dangerous and they're considered like an extension of the monsters. I never even heard of it, and I was so surprised by how much I enjoyed it. I did give this book 4 stars. And the final book that I read during the month of March was The Inheritance Games by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. This was the BOOKTUBE Chicks book pick of the month for the month of March, and I loved this book. I love this book so much. Has a little bit of mystery. So our main character, she finds out she inherited a lot of money from this old guy who died, and he for some reason left her all of his money, and she has no idea who he is. She's not related to him, but she has to go and live at this mansion where the rest of his family lives, and she has to find out why he left her all of his fortune. It's super cool. It's very puzzle based, and I was just like, this book took me on a ride. I just had so much fun reading it, and I absolutely loved it. So I did give this book 5 stars. All right, moving on to April. Finally, this video is already long enough. The first book that I read was the sequel to the Inheritance game, which is the Hawthorne Legacy. Again, we're continuing on with our mystery and our puzzles, and again, it's really fun. I didn't quite enjoy this one as much as I loved the first book, so I did give this book 4 stars. The next book that I read was Shadow and Flame, and this is the sequel to Onyx and Ivory, and I really liked how this book ended. It was really fun. There was a rebellion that occurred in this book. I gave it 4 stars. It's just a duology, and again, I would recommend if you're looking for a quick and easy young adult fantasy read. And the next book that I read was Spin a Dawn by Elizabeth Lim. Again, this is the Pretty Fairy Loot edition. I'm in love with how this book looks, but this is a Mulan retelling, which I did not know going into this book, but it is about our main character. She has to pretend to be a guy in order to try out to be the Empress's like tailor, in order to help out her family who is struggling financially. Really enjoyed this book. I thought it was really entertaining, and I really loved the love interest, although it was a little bit of a insta love. I did end up giving this book 4 stars. The next book that I read during the month of April was Witchlings by Clara Bell Ortega. This is actually a middle grade fantasy, and it follows a trio of friends who, on the day that they get to be chosen for their covens, realize they're the spare witches, meaning they don't belong anywhere, they don't belong to any coven, so they invoke the impossible task, and by invoking the impossible task, and if they are able to complete it, they will find a place where they belong. I thought this book was a lot of fun. The characters were really interesting to read, and they were fun to read, so I did give this book 4 stars. The next book that I read during the month of April is from an author that I have a love and hate relationship with, because I've read one of her books and I hated it, and I read another one of her books and I loved it, and it is Verity by Colleen Hoover. This book has been so popular on Book Talk, and Chloe and Desiree have been telling me to read it, and I finally decided to bite the bullet and read it, and I actually ended up really loving it. Follows our main character. She is going to be like the co-writer for one of Verity. She's an author's series, and there's a lot of things that we find out about Verity. If you have read the book, I just want to say I am 100% team letter. I 100% believe the letter, and I know that I am in the minority because I've read reviews and apparently no one agrees with me, and that's okay. I'm just saying I believe the letter. I gave this book 5 stars. And the next book that I read was Neon Gods by Katie Roberts, and this was the BookTube Chicks book pick of the month for the month of April, and it is a Persephone and Hades retelling. I did not like it. It wasn't terrible, but I did not like it. I gave this book 3 stars. It's hovering around 2.5, but I decided to just bump it up to 3 stars. This book is a romance spicy book, and because it is so romance heavy and I hated the romance, hence why I couldn't rate it any higher than 3. I thought the romance was really cringy, and I thought the spicy scenes were really cringy to read. I don't want to rip this book apart, but yes, if you would like to hear more of my opinions on this book, I'll go ahead and leave the BookTube Chicks live show discussion linked on the screen. And the final book that I've read in the month of April, and the final book for this long video, is In the After by Demetria Lunetta. This is a sci-fi young adult book, and it follows a alien invasion, and honestly this book reminds me a little bit of the movie In a Quiet Place, because the aliens are attracted to sound. So our main character, she lives a lifestyle that is very quiet, silent. She literally does not speak. She and her companion, they speak through sign language, just like the movie, which I really love the movie, by the way. And so I really ended up enjoying this book. I thought it was a lot of fun and entertaining, and so I did give this book 4.5 stars. And there you go, guys. There is my 26 book wrap up from January to April. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I try not to ramble, but I can be known to do that. So if you guys have more questions about my opinions regarding any of the books that I talked about, go ahead and leave me a comment down below. Also, let me know how your reading has been, because I would really love to know. I've been having a great reading streak. I'm very proud of myself, especially since I went through a huge reading slump. If you stuck with me until the end, I appreciate you. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Please give it a like if you did, and subscribe to my channel if you're not already. All of my social medias, including TikTok, is linked down below, including Twitter, Instagram, and Goodreads if you'd like to follow me on those platforms. Hope to see you guys on my next video. Have a good day, guys, and keep reading. Bye.